Hi everyone, welcome to FIRM, Fairness in Reporting Media. They're still at it, folks. They just don't talk face to face, they just keep throwing barbs and little slings and arrows at each other over Title IX. But guess what? Title of our program this time around, folks, is a little bit disturbing. No thanks to her. The migrants are coming! The migrants are coming! And Title IX law. What's more important? Well, we're going to dig into that, folks. She, meaning Janet Mills, is likely to lose the battle of transgenders versus biologicals to the Trump administration, and we're getting that information from the Maine Policy Institute. Next, we're going to go into Janet Mills' latest slam against Maine citizens, from Fort Kent to Kittery and crosswise from Freiburg to Lubeck. What we're going to tell you and what you need to know about what her plans are under the Office of New Americans, the ONA. Oh, what an unbelievable catastrophe this is going to be if it gets passed. And then some good news for biological women as far as the NCAA is concerned. Thanks for joining us, folks. We appreciate it. First off, folks, as we mentioned, the transgender versus biologicals battle with Trump and Janet Mills, as you can see here. The initial story we have for you is why Governor Mills will likely lose her fight with Trump over Title IX from the Maine Policy Institute. Now, this was published on February 28th this year. I'm going to get right down to it here, folks. Here's what we're talking about right here. The story, of course, about biological men or transgender women, as they say, competing against biological girls in their sports has come to this. Mills and Trump butted heads February 21st over whether Maine could comply with the president's new non-trans inclusive Title IX interpretation, with both sides exchanging threats. Now, back on January 20th, over a month prior, Trump issued the executive order stating that his interpretation of anti-discrimination law protects women from being forced to compete against biological men in federally funded schools, and this includes his application of Title IX, which is federal law, which requires any educational institution receiving federal funds to not engage in sex-based discrimination. Federal government forces compliance with federal anti-discrimination laws in schools by threatening to remove federal funding if they do not comply. Gee, is Janet just not getting it here, folks? Federal law strikes out state law. But here comes the details, which are a little bit important. But the Maine Policy Institute, who wrote up this story on the background in their research, like we do, they predicted that such a conflict between Maine and federal authorities would occur if it wasn't until Trump pointed out Maine's non-compliance that Governor Mills issued a proper response. First, with her, it was about the Maine Human Rights Act, which includes a gender identity provision in the state that interprets to protect the right of trans students to join a sex-based sports team of their choice. Second is previous president's interpretations of Title IX. Okay, so here we go. You can't interpret the law. The law is the law. Typical deflectocrat. It's probably Obama, or it might have gone back to the Clinton administration. But anyway, the last thing is the Supreme Court precedents in a 2020 case, Bostock versus Clayton County. The Supreme Court, that's right, the U.S. Supreme Court, not Maine, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that sex-based discrimination also protected against sexual orientation-based discrimination, and this has been interpreted by many to include gender identity. This may seem like Mills has the upper hand. However, looking deeper into the rationale between each of her reasons and the overall background of the legal battle, anyone can see how much weaker her case is than it first appears. Because the Maine Human Rights Act may initially seem to support Mills' stance, and technically it does not circumvent federal law. While MHRA is an across-the-board requirement, Title IX technically is not. A state school could choose to violate Title IX and discriminate based on sex, but they would lose all of their federal education funding. Now, here's the bottom line, folks, when it comes to this nonsense, this stupid battle. For the state of Maine, the federal educational funding is $360 million a year, and losing that much money would be pretty impactful, and it means that the MHRA, the Maine Human Rights Act, does not create some sort of waiver against complying with Title IX, because Title IX does not technically even mandate universal compliance. This may be the strongest argument in Maine's case, as the courts have broadly interpreted Clayton County ruling in 2020 to apply to trans individuals' right to non-discrimination in education and employment. There are similar cases where trans identifying people were also considered protected by federal discrimination law. But these cases largely have covered employment law, making some question their applicability to education or schools. In addition, many of the arguments Governor Mills' case become completely irrelevant in considering the last big issue of her plan to fight Trump. The conclusion on all this, folks, our first story here under The Migrants Are Coming and Title IX law. Governor Mills was the former Attorney General of Maine, and current Attorney General Aaron Fry and her are both licensed attorneys, and they should know, they should already know that they're fighting a losing battle in this regard. If they understand that federal law rules over state law, a lesson we learned during the Civil War. You have to go back that far. Wow. It raises the question of how much state money they intend to waste on a fruitless lawsuit. And as much as Maine's governor may think she is doing the politically popular thing, oh God, shades of Bill Clinton again. Damn it. This writer says for the Maine Policy Institute that we hope Mills realizes the dire situation in which she's putting the state schools. The good news is that when public schools start shutting down because of a governor, at least they'll all qualify for school choice through town tutoring. Very good comeback. Thank you for the report there by Harris Van Pate of the Maine Policy Institute. On our next story, folks, we're talking about the Office of New Americans that Janet Mills has decided that she's going to form, and she's going to fix the state of Maine once and for all when it comes to getting the votes for her one sole party and put the Republican Party out of business and out of ideas and ways to stop anything. But This particular story, folks, is not the end of the line for the Republican Party. Far from it. Not while Donald Trump is president, and it goes beyond that. What's Janet Mills trying to do with this? Where it says here on the headline, you could probably read what to know about Maine's Office of New Americans. This article was prepared by the Maine Issues and Action PAC, a committee formed by Representative Mike Sobolewski, Republican of Phillips, Maine. The Office of New Americans State Network is a project of the Washington, D.C.-based American Immigration Council. And, see, not even to do with Maine. Once again, outside money and outside forces. Give me a break. The New York City-based World Education Services. Oh, God. Can't you stand these things, folks? World Education Services. We're talking about the United States here. Both parent organizations are 501c3 nonprofits that work with the Office of New Americans State Network to develop ONAs in states across the country. So you see, it's not just here in Maine, folks. They're trying to flood every single state in the nation with illegal migrants. Is that kind of hitting home with your pocketbook yet? Stay tuned. We're not done with this one yet. The Maine office, M-A-I-N-E, states its goals are in alignment with Governor Mills' 10-year economic plan to bring 75,000 new people to Maine. New Mainers is closer to 300,000 people. That's right. Over 500,000. 250,000. I digress. Over 300,000 people if you account for a spouse and an average of 2 children per each person being recruited to Maine by Mills and her administration. The population in the 2020 census of Maine was 1.3 million people. That's all. We just went past 1.4 million. Maine does not have the infrastructure or tax revenue to support this mandate from Mills in an increase of almost 25% of existing 2020 population figures. These increased costs will largely fall on municipalities for required general assistance, school, and utility costs. Oh, God, this is so pathetic. Moving this many people to Maine will also impact housing, and opens the door through LD 2003, LD 2003, to municipalities being forced to adhere to the Department of Housing and Urban Development density requirements for low-income housing. All this drastic change, and there was no bill to create a Maine Office of New Americans that received a vote by a House or a Senate. No bill to do any of this made its way through full legislative process with a public hearing, committee vote, House debate, House vote, Senate vote, and required concurrence of those votes in both legislative chambers. So how did we get the hell here? Pen stroke. Just like Biden. Just like Obama. On August 2nd of 2023, she signed, meaning Mills, yours to gaze upon, so what she did was sign an executive order back in August of 23, tasking the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation and the Future, GOPIF, to participate in the Office of New Americans State Network. And it was ordered to develop a plan to establish a new state office for immigration and immigrant resettlement. And guess who comes in line with this, folks? Another deflectocrat's relative. Who's that? The former Democratic Speaker of the Maine House of Representatives is in charge of the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation and Future. She's also the daughter of Congresswoman Shelley Pingree, Hannah Pingree. Damn. Now, the plan was delivered on time in January of 2024, a little over a year ago. It was paired with a legislative bill titled LD 2167, an act to develop Maine's economy and strengthen its workforce. by establishing an Office of New Americans from Representative Deka Dalak, Democrat of South Portland. Guess what? It was referenced to have public hearing and a committee vote before advancing to the full House and Senate floor for debate and subsequent vote, but would have established the Office of New Americans within the confines of the executive branch. Overstepping your bounds, Janet, according to the Constitution. And it kept it in the office of the governor. They also would have established an advisory council of 19 people. Always more and more people to have to decide whether this is going to work or not. But you know they're just going to push it through anyway. The LD 2167 bill received a contentious public hearing and partisan committee vote. However, the bill itself never left the Senate or never left the state and local government committee, which is odd for such a big bill with passionate voices for and against it. The bill to create the Maine Office of New Americans never followed the required legislative process of debate in both chambers, followed by a vote. The full legislative process requirement was even stated in the actual GOPIF plan to establish the new Maine Office of Americans. Timeline that the ONA should be established in statute during the legislative session during 2024 with accompanying staff proposed in supplemental budget. They're going to put it in the supplemental budget no matter what. The vote to pass the supplemental budget was entirely partisan. Surprise. All Democrats in the House voted for it and all Republicans voted against it. In the Senate, it was again a total party line split, except for progressive Senator Nicole Grohowski of Hancock. But here's the deal, folks. Wrapping up this particular story, the ONA has had taxpayer money appropriated to hire a public services coordinator, an executive. There's currently an active job listing for the position of director at the present time. It's likely, though, a leadership person or a director has probably already been chosen behind closed doors. But the 132nd legislature convened in January this year, and it expected that expansion and permanent funding of ONA will be on the legislative docket. There's also a chance, though, folks, that the previous legislature would have been called into special session after Election Day of this past November before January to secure funding and expansion of the ONA and the current Democratic legislative majorities in both chambers. Hope it doesn't go through, folks. You better pray that it doesn't. Next up, folks, now that we know all about Janet Mills' procedure there to divest, include, and equify our population centers, small though they are, they just don't want to stop. Only because of one person who was in the White House. Again, as the people have spoken around the country. But here's one, folks, we want you to at least get some good news from. You may not have heard of the most recent information that came down from the National Collegiate Athletic Association, the NCAA. What is it? To put a match, hopefully, to this crap of DEI and ESG once and for all. Back on February 26th, the NCAA officially stripped Leah Thomas of her, or his, title and all medals, and Riley Gaines will get them all back thanks to outside forces. Here's some of the responses to that. Gabriella. Not all these people may be posting from the state of Maine, but we're going to go through them fairly quickly here, folks. Gabriella responded by saying that, "You mean justice." That's what it is. "Justice is being served," says a Mr. Shamsi. Another person wrote, "It is as it should be. This should have never been allowed to happen." Dahlia responded, "He," meaning Leah, who's actually a man, "should have been honest from the very beginning. It would have saved all this heartache. Still, there is the question, did he really get what he wanted? Lots of publicity, imagine? It's not good now. Time for the Olympics to do the same." Another one says, "As he should. Good for Riley. She deserves it. Great outcome, great fight by Riley Gaines. Thank you. Stripped off his titles." His titles and his medals. Never should have had it in the first place. That's fantastic news. His. That's right. He has the bulk to show down in his bathing suit. Never mind what could have happened or probably did happen previously in the locker room. God forbid. Riley deserves to be covered on the news, standing on a podium, receiving her medal, and congratulations. Thanks for fighting the good fight, Riley Gaines. Pretty sad that she, Riley, had to endure this crap. Yes, justice for Riley. The NCAA should have never allowed this to happen in the first place. I hope that's true and could never call that damn dude a girl. The people stupid enough to say it's okay to do that stuff should all be fired. Well, that's for sure. When will these men realize that they are not women and leave women alone? The nation is healing, as it should be. It's about time. And that is all, folks. Some trying news, but also some encouraging news from debacle between Title IX, Janet Mills and her human resources. Maine law gets overridden. And as for her Office of New Americans, let's pray. Pray heavily, ladies and gentlemen. Pray heavily that this does not happen. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you again, as always, for joining us. Also, check out our website on rumble.com/fairnessmedia1. Over 300, close to 320 podcasts now on truth, facts, reality, and common sense at your disposal. As well, we encourage you to use and message us at fairnessinreportingmedia@gmail.com, fairnessinreportingmedia@gmail.com, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. As always, be at peace, ladies and gentlemen, and stay safe.